picture this. You're standing in the produce aisle of your local grocery store on a Tuesday evening.
Oh, yeah. We all know that feeling.
Right. The fluorescent lights are buzzing overhead. The little sprinklers are doing that misting thing on the leafy greens. And you are just staring at an absolute sea of vegetables.
It's overwhelming.
It really is. You've got your shopping cart, and you're wondering which of these actually live up to the superfood hype.
Yeah.
Because we have all been there. You look at the kale, the broccoli, those imported tomatoes, and you are instantly bombarded with conflicting memories of every diet article you've ever read.
Oh, absolutely. One day, a certain vegetable is the literal secret to immortality.
Right. The next day, you're reading some blog post claiming it's completely full of anti-nutrients that are destroying your gut.
Yeah.
It is exhausting.
Yeah.
It's completely exhausting to try and eat well.
The sheer volume of dietary advice out there is honestly enough to make anyone just throw their hands up and order takeout. I mean, the problem is that most of the information we consume about vegetables comes from these really simplistic headlines that just need to drive clicks.
Exactly.
But the reality of plant biology and human nutrition is far more nuanced. When you actually dig into the clinical literature, the way our bodies interact with these plants is this highly complex, fascinating biochemical dance.
And that is exactly why today's deep dive is designed to be your ultimate science-backed shortcut to understanding the absolute healthiest vegetables on the planet. Our mission today is to slice right through all those pop culture myths and anchor ourselves entirely in hard, undeniable clinical evidence.
Yeah, no lifestyle blogs today.
None at all. We are doing this specifically for you, the learner. Because you want to be insanely well-informed, you want those profound aha moments, but you definitely do not want to drown in impenetrable medical jargon or sift through dry academic papers.
Right.
So we are taking the highest level of nutritional science and translating it into practical knowledge you can actually use the next time you're staring down that produce aisle. Okay, let's unpack this.
To do that effectively, we really had to ignore the influencer posts. The stack of sources for this deep dive is massive, and it's incredibly rigorous.
Oh, it's dense.
Very dense. We've pulled together a collection of PubMed systematic reviews, umbrella reviews, expensive meta-analyses, double-blind clinical trials, and even global food-based dietary guidelines. So we are looking exclusively at the gold standard of nutritional science to see what the data actually proves.
But before we dive into the specific vegetables themselves, we need to set the stage regarding how we fundamentally view plants. Because we tend to think of vegetables as just these static blocks of vitamins and minerals and fiber.
Right, like a vitamin pill that just happens to be green.
Exactly. A carrot, you get vitamin A. You eat spinach, you get iron. It feels very transactional and one-dimensional.
Yeah, and the overarching theme we have to understand today is that the chemistry of plants is incredibly dynamic. Plants are essentially stationary chemical factories.
That's a great way to put it.
Because they can't run away from predators, right? And they can't migrate to seek out shelter from harsh weather or intense UV radiation. So they survive by synthesizing a vast, complex array of bioactive molecules.
They defend themselves chemically.
Exactly. The synthesis and the accumulation of these molecules depend heavily on environmental conditions, the mineral content of the soil, the intensity of the sun, the specific stressors the plant endures while growing. All of this changes its chemical makeup. But even more importantly for you and your daily health, how we process these plants in our kitchens fundamentally alters their interaction with the human body.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. The acts of cooking, extracting, chopping, freezing, and even combining them with other specific foods on your plate, it changes everything from their nutrient bioavailability to their actual chemical structure.
So we aren't just talking about what to eat today. We're talking about how to eat it, how to prep it, and why it matters on a cellular level. This deep dive is going to equip you with some truly surprising facts that will forever change how you view your dinner plate.
Absolutely.
So let's start with the absolute heavyweights of the produce aisle, the cruciferous family, specifically broccoli and kale. Now, broccoli is like the quintessential healthy food, right? It's the little tree-like vegetable every parent tries to force-feed their kids.
Yes.
But when you look at the science behind its anti-cancer arsenal, it completely stops being a boring side dish and starts looking like a highly advanced pharmaceutical.
It really does. To appreciate broccoli, or Brassica oleracea variety italica, to use its botanical name, we have to look at a very specific, almost defensive chemical transformation that happens when you eat it.
Right.
Broccoli's raw cellular matrix contains a plethora of phytochemicals, but the absolute stars of the show are a class of compounds called glucosinolates, and the most prominent one in broccoli is called glucoraphanin.
Glucoraphanin. Got it.
Now, in its intact, undisturbed state sitting on the supermarket shelf, that glucoraphanin isn't actually doing much for human health. It's essentially dormant.
It's just waiting. It's waiting for the plant to be attacked. Because in nature, that attack might be a caterpillar chewing on the leaf. But in your kitchen, that attack is your chef's knife chopping the florets, or your teeth physically crushing the cellular walls of the plant.
Exactly. When that physical damage occurs, the plant cells break open and release an enzyme called myrosinase. This enzyme was previously kept in a completely separate cellular compartment from the glucoraphanin.
Like a biological booby trap.
Yes. Once they mix, the myrosinase rapidly hydrolyzes the glucoraphanin, and it converts it into a biologically active isothiocyanate called sulforaphane.
And sulforaphane is the compound that generates all the headlines. And for really good reason. Once that sulforaphane enters your digestive tract and gets absorbed into your bloodstream, the anti-cancer mechanisms it initiates are staggering. I mean, it provides incredibly strong antioxidant effects naturally, but it goes way beyond just neutralizing roaming free radicals.
It does.
It actively modulates the specific molecules involved in regulating your cell cycles. And one of the most critical things it does is control a cellular process called apoptosis.
Which is essentially programmed cell death.
Right.
Every healthy cell in your body has a built-in mechanism to recognize when its own DNA has become too damaged to function safely. When that happens, the cell initiates apoptosis and just quietly destroys itself to prevent those mutations from spreading.
Falls out its sword for the greater good.
Exactly. Cancer cells, however, are notoriously adept at bypassing this system. They effectively turn off their own self-destruct mechanism, which allows them to multiply uncontrollably and form tumors.
And this is where the sulforaphane from the broccoli acts like a master programmer. It enters these damaged or precancerous cells and effectively overrides their corrupted programming, and it flips that self-destruct switch back on. It tells the cancerous cells to initiate apoptosis and die off.
It's incredible.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's essentially tuning the enzyme activity within your cells to create a highly inhospitable environment for any sort of tumor development.
Right.
And the clinical literature across numerous in vitro, in vivo, and human clinical trials strongly backs this up. It's a profound chemopreventive agent.
And for anyone listening who wants to maximize this specific benefit, the data shows that the highest concentrations of these beneficial glucosinolates are found in the fresh florets of mature broccoli, and incredibly massive concentrations in broccoli sprouts.
Oh yeah, broccoli sprouts are potent.
Very. But beyond the sulforaphane, a standard 100-gram portion of broccoli packs roughly 90 milligrams of vitamin C. That is approximately 60% more vitamin C than you would get from eating a standard orange.
Which people never realize. They always reach for citrus.
Right. Furthermore, that single portion covers 130% of your daily requirement for vitamin K, which is absolutely crucial for proper blood clotting and for binding calcium into your bone structure. What's fascinating here is the cascading systemic effect of these nutrients.
Yes.
Well, we often compartmentalize foods. We think this one is for the heart, this one is for the bones. But the phytochemicals in broccoli also have a profound impact on ocular health. Broccoli contains significant amounts of lutein.
Oh, lutein.
Yeah. Lutein is a carotenoid, a type of organic pigment, but what makes it uniquely valuable is that it selectively crosses the blood-retina barrier and accumulates directly in the macula of your eye.
So it's physically building up a protective shield inside your retina, which is huge because we are all staring at phones, laptops, and bright monitors all day long. Our eyes are just constantly bombarded by high-energy blue light.
Instantly.
And lutein actively absorbs that damaging blue light. It acts as a highly localized antioxidant right there in the tissue of the eye, which strongly protects against the development of age-related cataracts and macular degeneration. The studies even show it can improve overall visual acuity and significantly reduce the subjective feeling of eye fatigue.
It's a powerhouse. But before we move on to kale, it is really critical that we address a very persistent fear surrounding broccoli and the entire cruciferous family.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to bring up.
If you spend enough time reading health forums, you will inevitably encounter the claim that eating broccoli causes thyroid disorders, specifically goiters.
The thyroid myth. This one refuses to die. The theory is that certain breakdown products of those glucosinolates we just praised can actually compete with iodine for absorption in the thyroid gland. And since your thyroid needs iodine to produce metabolic hormones, blocking it sounds like a terrible idea.
The underlying biochemistry of that competition is theoretically true, but the clinical reality is entirely different. The consensus across the dietary guidelines and systematic reviews is very clear. For healthy individuals who have an adequate intake of iodine in their diet, consuming normal or even highly elevated culinary amounts of broccoli is completely safe. It will not induce thyroid dysfunction.
But what if you are someone who already has a diagnosed pre-existing thyroid condition like hypothyroidism? The clinical takeaway here is that you absolutely do not need to avoid broccoli and miss out on all that sulforaphane and lutein.
Not at all.
The solution is just basic thermal processing. Steaming or boiling your broccoli for a few minutes effectively deactivates the specific goitrogenic compounds while still retaining a substantial amount of the nutritional value. The risk is virtually eliminated just by cooking it.
Exactly. Now, moving from broccoli, we have to look at its incredibly famous botanical cousin, kale. Brassica oleracea variety acephala.
The king of the superfoods.
Right. Over the last decade, kale experienced an astronomical rise in popularity. I mean, it transitioned from being a cheap, sturdy garnish used to decorate ice at salad bars to being the undisputed, heavily marketed king of the superfoods. We have to ask if that specific superfood status is justified by the clinical science, or if it's primarily driven by brilliant marketing and popular culture hype.
The data paints a really interesting picture here. From a pure biochemical standpoint, kale is undeniably a fantastic vegetable. It shares a very similar, highly impressive phytochemical profile with broccoli. It is absolutely packed with vitamin K, vitamin C, lutein, and beta-carotene. The scientific reviews absolutely validate its health-promoting properties.
They do.
However, when we ask if it is biologically superior to broccoli or other dark leafy greens in every conceivable way, which the pop culture narrative often implies, but it is not a magical cure-all that renders spinach or Swiss chard obsolete.
And it doesn't need to be magical because it does possess one massive standout feature that sets it apart from many other vegetables. And this is highly relevant depending on your specific dietary choices.
What's the standout?
The unique standout feature of kale is its incredibly bioavailable calcium content.
Yes, because if you are following a vegan diet or if you're lactose intolerant and actively avoiding dairy, finding bioavailable calcium is a genuine concern.
A huge concern.
And many plant sources of calcium also contain high levels of oxalates, which bind to the calcium and prevent your body from actually absorbing it. But kale is very low in oxalates. So when you eat kale, your body is able to absorb a significant percentage of that calcium, allowing it to serve as a primary, highly effective source for maintaining your bone matrix. You don't have to rely entirely on fortified plant milks. You can get highly absorbable calcium straight from the leaf.
Which is fantastic. As we transition from the green, leafy, cruciferous vegetables, we enter a category that requires a total paradigm shift in how we think about food preparation. Let's explore the red and orange protectors: tomatoes, carrots, and pumpkins.
I love this section.
The tomato in particular presents one of the most fascinating culinary paradoxes in all of nutritional science.
The tomato paradox is fantastic because it completely subverts our standard expectations. We've been heavily conditioned by the wellness industry to believe that raw, fresh, straight-from-the-earth produce is inherently the healthiest possible option. We are constantly taught that cooking destroys delicate vitamins and enzymes.
We hear it all the time.
But the tomato openly defies this rule. Unlike almost every other vegetable on the planet, tomatoes are actually significantly healthier for you when they are heavily processed rather than eaten completely raw.
To understand the mechanics of this paradox, we have to isolate the primary bioactive molecule in the tomato, lycopene. Lycopene is an incredibly potent antioxidant belonging to the carotenoid family. It's the specific pigment responsible for giving the tomato its deep red color.
Right.
Now, in a raw, fresh tomato, the lycopene is tightly bound within the plant's rigid cell walls. It exists in a highly stable crystalline structure known as a trans-isomer.
And your digestive tract, with all its acids and enzymes, actually has a very difficult time breaking down that raw cellular matrix to extract that trans-lycopene. You end up passing a lot of it straight through your system without ever absorbing it.
Exactly. When you apply thermal processing, whether you're slowly simmering them down into a marinara sauce or industrial processing them into tomato paste or boiling them for a soup, the sustained heat physically degrades and breaks down those tough cell walls.
It softens it all up.
But even more critically, the thermal energy actually alters the molecular structure of the lycopene itself. It shifts the molecule from a trans isomer to a cis isomer. This cis conformation is exponentially more bioavailable. Your body recognizes it and absorbs it with remarkable efficiency.
But the heat is only the first half of the equation. Because lycopene is lipophilic. Because it's fat-soluble, it inherently dissolves in lipids, not water. If you slice a raw tomato and eat it on a dry salad without any dressing, the amount of lycopene making it into your bloodstream is negligible.
Almost nothing.
But if you take those thermally processed cis-isomer tomatoes and pair them with high-quality dietary fats like extra virgin olive oil, canola oil, or flaxseed oil, the lycopene actively binds to the lipids.
Those lipids essentially act as a biological transport mechanism. They shuttle the lycopene directly across your intestinal wall and right into your systemic circulation. It perfectly validates the traditional Mediterranean method of cooking tomatoes low and slow with generous amounts of olive oil. I mean, they optimized the biochemistry of the tomato long before we understood the molecular structure of carotenoids.
It's amazing how traditional cooking methods figured that out.
Yeah.
And you absolutely want this highly bioavailable lycopene circulating in your blood because the clinical benefits are staggering.
Yeah.
The systematic reviews we analyze compile massive data sets on this. Eating high amounts of cooked tomatoes is strongly linked to a 14% to 19% reduction in the risk of developing prostate cancer.
That's significant.
But its protective effects extend way beyond the prostate. High circulating lycopene lowers the risk of stroke and coronary heart disease mortality by an average of 26%. The data shows it is also inversely associated with gastric cancer, cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, and even male infertility. And tomatoes also contain another fascinating compound called tomatine, which is showing tremendous potential in emerging cellular models.
The clinical data on lycopene is incredibly robust, but we do need to maintain a balanced, highly objective view here. Human biology is vastly diverse, and there is no single food on the planet that is universally perfect for every human being. The sources provide a very necessary look at the potential risks and adverse effects associated with high tomato consumption.
Because it's a potent plant.
Right. Depending on your individual physiological chemistry and environmental factors, tomatoes can act as a trigger for several conditions.
Yeah, it's not all sunshine and perfect health. The most common issue highlighted in the literature is the high acidity of the tomato, which can be a massive trigger for gastroesophageal reflux disease, commonly known as GER, leading to severe and chronic heartburn. Furthermore, certain individuals have localized histamine-driven allergies to specific proteins found within the tomato matrix.
Beyond the immediate acidic and allergic reactions, the sources note that in susceptible populations, excessive consumption can actively exacerbate irritable bowel syndrome, various kidney disorders, and even certain types of inflammatory arthritis.
Wow.
There is also a completely harmless but visually alarming condition called lycopenodermia. If you consume truly massive, persistent amounts of lycopene, the pigment will actually accumulate in your skin tissues, turning your skin a distinct shade of orange.
Which would definitely be alarming to wake up to.
Very. And edge cases of extreme overconsumption have also reported urinary tract irritation and generalized body aches.
It really is a potent biological compound. And as with anything, the dose makes the poison. So what is the actionable advice for you? The clinical sweet spot suggested by the literature, the intake level that maximizes the cancer and heart-protecting benefits without tipping the scales into gastrointestinal distress or adverse effects, is surprisingly achievable. We are looking at eating roughly 2 whole tomatoes a day, or drinking 1 standard glass of unsalted tomato juice.
Let's shift our focus to the next major orange protector in our deep dive: carrots. The volume of data we have on carrots and human health is staggering, largely thanks to a massive umbrella review analyzed in our sources.
Umbrella reviews are the best.
They really are. An umbrella review is essentially a meta-analysis of other meta-analyses. It represents the highest possible level of evidence synthesis in modern medical research, gathering data from potentially millions of participants across decades of controlled study to find the undeniable macro-level patterns regarding human carotene consumption.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We all grew up hearing that carrots are good for your eyes, which is true, given the vitamin A precursor. But the specific oncology statistics coming out of this umbrella review are absolute showstoppers. We're talking about massive population-level risk reductions. Regular carrot and carotene consumption is linked to a 42% lower risk of lung cancer.
42%.
The data shows a 37% lower risk of urothelial, or urinary tract, cancer. It demonstrates a 21% lower risk of breast cancer and an 18% lower risk of prostate cancer. It also shows a significant protective effect against gastric and colorectal cancers.
The sheer breadth of the protective shield provided by beta-carotene across completely different organ systems is remarkable, and the benefits extend far beyond cancer prevention. High dietary carotene intake is inversely associated with bone fractures. Yeah, the epidemiological data shows that populations who consume more carrots simply break their bones less often as they age. It strongly protects against the development of age-related cataracts, and incredibly, it provides a measurable level of systemic protection against sunburn.
I found that detail fascinating.
Ah,
The carotenoids physically accumulate in your dermal layers and help neutralize the oxidative free radicals generated when UV radiation hits your skin. It is acting like a very low-grade internal sunscreen.
exactly. Additionally, the umbrella review points to strong inverse associations with the onset of Alzheimer's disease and various head and neck cancers. Ultimately, the researchers concluded that high serum carotene levels, meaning the actual measurable amount of carotene circulating in a patient's bloodstream, is inversely linked to all-cause mortality. Statistically speaking, individuals with high serum carotene simply live longer, healthier lives across virtually every metric of human health.
It is the ultimate clinical endorsement for the humble carrot. But let's look at another orange vegetable that rarely gets the respect it deserves outside of autumn decorations. Pumpkins. The sources highlight pumpkins, which originally traced their agricultural roots back to Mexico as the uncontaminated supergourd. What exactly makes a vegetable clean in this context?
This is a vital point regarding modern agricultural realities. Many root vegetables and gourds act like biological sponges in the soil. If a field has been exposed to heavy metals or persistent environmental pollutants, the plant's root system will actively absorb those toxic elements, accumulate them in the edible tissues, and ultimately pass them on to the consumer.
It's just terrifying.
It is. Pumpkins, however, possess a very unique biological defense mechanism where their root systems do not readily absorb or accumulate these heavy metals from the surrounding soil.
This makes them an incredibly safe option, especially when you are making food for infants or toddlers. Their developing nervous systems are exquisitely vulnerable to heavy metal exposure. Knowing that pumpkin is highly resistant to this kind of soil contamination makes it one of the absolute safest, cleanest whole foods you can introduce into a child's diet.
The flesh of the pumpkin itself is also highly digestible and surprisingly low in calories, yielding only about 30 kilocalories per 100 grams. Yet within that low-calorie matrix, it is incredibly dense with potassium.
We always need more potassium.
Right. Potassium is a critical intracellular mineral responsible for regulating systemic blood pressure, preventing the formation of kidney stones, and meticulously managing your body's acid base and water electrolyte balance. Plus, like the carrot, it is loaded with provitamin A. But while the flesh is excellent for general nutrition, the more advanced scientific literature is increasingly focusing on the extraction of pumpkin seed oil as a highly potent functional food.
Pumpkin seed oil is usually something you only see in high-end culinary specialty shops, mostly used as a finishing oil. But medically, the lipid profile is a powerhouse.
It is. The oil extracted directly from the seeds contains a highly complex synergistic matrix of polyphenols, specific phytoestrogens, beneficial unsaturated fatty acids, squalene, and naturally occurring tocopherols. However, the commercial extraction process is the absolute defining factor here.
How so?
If the oil is extracted using harsh industrial chemical solvents or extreme heat, these delicate bioactive components are instantly denatured and destroyed. To retain its medical functionality, it absolutely must be cold-pressed.
And when it is properly cold-pressed, the clinical applications become very specific and highly effective. The clinical studies highlight its efficacy in two major areas. First, it is particularly beneficial for managing cardiovascular issues, specifically in menopausal women, helping to effectively regulate lipid profiles and stabilize blood pressure during that significant hormonal transition.
Right.
Second, because of the very specific phytoestrogens and fatty acid profiles it contains, it has been shown in controlled trials to be highly effective in treating various ailments and prostate issues associated with sex hormone imbalances in both men and women. It acts as a very targeted functional lipid therapy.
Moving from the bright reds and oranges, we are going to dig deeper into the earth to explore some truly profound biochemical pathways. Let's look at the rooted powerhouses, beetroot and the Jerusalem artichoke. The story of beetroot is a masterclass in human microbiome symbiosis, but it is also a distinct double-edged sword, particularly if you are an athlete or heavily invested in sports nutrition.
Over the last decade, concentrated beetroot juice has completely taken the endurance sports world by storm. And the entire mechanism of why it makes you run faster and longer revolves around the nitric oxide pathway. Beetroots pull a compound called dietary nitrate directly from the soil. Chemically, this is NO3. The fascinating part is that human cells do not actually possess the specific enzymes required to effectively reduce this raw nitrate into a bioavailable form that our bodies can use.
This is where the biological sequence becomes truly incredible. When you drink a shot of beetroot juice, the heavy lifting of digestion isn't actually done by the stomach acid or the liver enzymes. It is outsourced to the bacteria living in your mouth.
Just living right there on your tongue.
Exactly. When you consume dietary nitrates from the beetroot, they enter your bloodstream and your body actively concentrates them in your salivary glands. As you continually swallow this nitrate-rich saliva throughout the day, specific colonies of anaerobic bacteria that reside in the deep, low-oxygen crypts of your tongue get to work. These bacteria feed on the nitrate NO3 and chemically reduce it into nitrite NO2.
This nitrite then travels down your esophagus and into the highly acidic environment of your stomach. That intense gastric acid further reduces the nitrite into a gas called nitric oxide, or NO. That NO is then rapidly absorbed through the intestines and enters your systemic bloodstream. So the crucial takeaway here is if you are using an intense, broad-spectrum antibacterial mouthwash right after drinking beetroot juice, you are literally annihilating the specific bacterial colonies required to initiate this entire process. You are completely severing the chemical pathway.
And you absolutely want this pathway operating at maximum efficiency because the physiological impact of nitric oxide circulating in your blood is profound. NO acts as a potent systemic vasodilator. It interacts directly with the smooth muscle cells lining your blood vessels, signaling them to relax and widen.
And for you, the listener, the physical consequences of that vasodilation are what make this ergogenic gold. By widening the vascular lumen, it drastically increases the volume of oxygen-rich blood flowing directly to your working skeletal muscles. It enhances gas exchange in the alveolar capillaries of the lungs. At the microscopic cellular level, it actually boosts mitochondrial biogenesis, meaning it signals your body to physically build more cellular power plants within the muscle fiber, and it improves the oxygen efficiency of the mitochondria you already have. The literature even shows it strengthens the actual physical contractile force of your muscle fibers.
The clinical endpoints of these cellular changes translate to massive real-world performance gains. It measurably improves cardiorespiratory endurance. It significantly increases a subject's time to exhaustion when they are exercising at submaximal intensities. It bumps up the overall VO2 max. It can even mitigate the negative performance-draining effects of working out in high-altitude, low-oxygen environments, what the scientific literature refers to as the ergolytic effects of hypoxia.
This is basically legal doping.
It is essentially a highly effective, completely legal form of blood doping.
It sounds perfect, but as we mentioned earlier, it is a double-edged sword. There is a catch to how you use it, and there is a very real toxicological risk if you abuse it. The first catch is a common dietary interaction. The literature strongly suggests that combining your beetroot juice with high, concentrated doses of caffeine, which is incredibly common, as many athletes mix it with pre-workout supplements or espresso, can actually undermine and physically blunt the vasodilatory benefits of the nitric oxide.
Right, because caffeine causes vasoconstriction.
Exactly. It effectively fights the beetroot's vasodilation.
The far more significant concern, however, is the dark side of excessive chronic consumption. Because the athletic benefits are so pronounced, people tend to overdo it, relying on highly concentrated synthetic nitrate powders rather than whole beetroots. If you flood your system with far too much dietary nitrate, the highly acidic environment of your stomach can stimulate the endogenous formation of N-nitroso compounds, widely known as NOCs.
And NOCs are a well-documented class of highly carcinogenic compounds. They actively damage DNA. Therefore, the scientific consensus emphasizes the absolute necessity for a balanced, rational risk-benefit assessment. Using whole beetroot juice as a targeted tool for specific athletic events is highly effective, but blind, chronic, high-dose supplementation with nitrate concentrates poses a genuine, measurable toxicological risk to your cellular health.
Moderation and biological context are absolutely critical. Let's pivot to our second rooted powerhouse. This is a vegetable that is likely not in your regular grocery rotation, but after understanding its specific pharmacology, it absolutely should be. We are talking about the Jerusalem artichoke, also known globally as topinambar.
First off, despite the name, it is neither from Jerusalem nor is it actually an artichoke. It is a species of sunflower that actually originated in North America and was brought back to Europe by Christopher Columbus in the early 16th century. It looks like a knobby little ginger root, but it serves as a fantastic low-glycemic culinary substitute for potatoes or rice, and has this wonderful sweet, slightly nutty flavor. But in the scientific literature, it is essentially viewed as high-grade gut fertilizer.
And the reason it earns that title is because the Jerusalem artichoke is one of nature's most concentrated, dense sources of a carbohydrate called inulin. The human digestive system, specifically the stomach and the small intestine, does not possess the enzymes necessary to break down and digest inulin. Consequently, it passes entirely intact down into your large intestine and colon, where it acts as a highly effective prebiotic.
Let's clearly define that distinction for the listener because the supplement industry often blurs these terms. A probiotic is the actual live bacterial culture you ingest, like the specific strains found in yogurt, kefir, or kimchi. A prebiotic, like inulin, is the specific indigestible dietary fiber that those beneficial bacteria consume to survive, multiply, and thrive in your gut.
And inulin happens to be the highly preferred metabolic food source for some of the most critical beneficial bacterial strains in your entire microbiome, specifically the lactobacillus and bifidobacterium species. When you consume a Jerusalem artichoke, you are laying down premium fertilizer for your gut flora. And the systemic, full-body benefits of cultivating that specific microbial environment are immense and wide-ranging.
The list of benefits pulled from the systematic reviews is staggering. On a basic level, it obviously improves overall digestion, softens stool by drawing water into the bowel, and effectively prevents chronic constipation. But moving beyond the gut, it acts as a remarkably powerful anti-diabetic agent. It actively lowers circulating fasting blood glucose levels, it reduces glycated hemoglobin, your A1C marker, and it physically reduces cellular insulin resistance.
It does wonders for metabolism.
On the cardiovascular front, the inulin fermentation process alters lipid metabolism, actively lowering your bad LDL cholesterol while simultaneously raising your protective HDL cholesterol. It even helps physically detoxify the body by binding to alcohol, circulating heavy metals, and radionuclides into the digestive tract, ensuring your body excretes them safely. And incredibly specific isolated fractions of the Jerusalem artichoke have demonstrated distinct cytotoxic properties specifically targeted against breast cancer cells.
It creates a remarkable cascade of systemic health benefits, all stemming from the foundational act of feeding the correct gut bacteria. But within the literature, there is a very specific, fascinating mineral mechanism I want to highlight because it represents a highly actionable insight for daily nutrition.
Yes, a mineral hack.
Yeah.
This is one of the coolest biochemical interactions in the whole stack of sources.
As the bifidobacterium rapidly ferments the inulin in your lower intestine, they produce short-chain fatty acids. This actually slightly lowers the localized pH of your intestinal tract, making it more acidic. This specific shift in pH, combined with alterations to the cellular transport mechanisms in your intestinal lining, significantly increases your body's physical capacity to absorb essential minerals. We are talking about critical minerals like magnesium, calcium, zinc, and copper.
Which we all struggle to absorb.
Right. If you swallow a magnesium supplement pill on a completely empty stomach, your body might only absorb a small fraction of the compound. But if you consume those exact same minerals alongside a serving of roasted Jerusalem artichoke, the fermenting inulin effectively alters and unlocks the gut wall, allowing a vastly higher percentage of those critical minerals to cross the barrier and enter your bloodstream.
That is the definition of a profound aha moment right there. It is food synergy playing out in real time. If you want to maximize the absorption of your mineral-rich foods or your daily supplements, pair them with the inulin from a Jerusalem artichoke. But, much like the beetroot, there is a distinct clinical warning attached to this vegetable.
Because the inulin ferments so rapidly and vigorously in the gut, excessive intake can lead to massive sudden gas production. The clinical guidance derived from gastrointestinal studies is to strictly cap your intake at around 100 grams of Jerusalem artichoke per day. Consuming quantities significantly above that threshold can cause severe gastrointestinal distress, intense bloating, painful cramping, and flatulence.
Nobody wants that.
Definitely not. Interestingly, this exact rapid fermentation characteristic is also why Jerusalem artichokes possess such incredible industrial versatility. They are actively used in commercial biotechnology and biorefineries to produce high yields of ethanol, butanol, and various vital industrial acids like succinic, citric, and lactic acids. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Jerusalem artichoke really represents the perfect intersection of human health, complex microbiology, and even sustainable industrial agriculture. It is a robust crop that demands very little from the soil, yet offers massive physiological and commercial returns.
I completely agree. It is a crop that deserves far more attention both in our kitchens and in agricultural planning. All right, we're moving into the Mediterranean staples. We are going to dive deeply into the standard globe artichoke and the absolute titan of functional foods, garlic. Let's start with the artichoke, which the literature essentially frames as the liver's absolute best friend. And using artichokes for liver health isn't some newly discovered wellness fad. The historical sources note that artichokes are one of the oldest cultivated vegetables in human history, heavily favored for their medicinal properties by the ancient Romans, the Greeks, and the Egyptians. They clearly recognized its physiological impact long before microscopes existed.
They absolutely did, even if they lacked the molecular pharmacology to explain the mechanisms. Today, modern chromatography shows us that the primary hero compound concentrated in the artichoke leaf and root extract is a highly potent polyphenol called sonorin. The clinical data analyzing sonorin is absolutely unequivocal. It is profoundly hepatoprotective. It actively shields the liver from toxic damage.
And it doesn't just act as a shield against future damage. It actually possesses the capability to help heal and reverse existing damage. The clinical trial data specifically looking at non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NAFLD, is incredible.
In double-blind clinical trials involving patients suffering from diagnosed NAFLD, consistent supplementation with artichoke extract produces remarkable results. It not only reliably lowers the elevated serum liver enzymes, which are the primary biological markers indicating active cellular damage and liver inflammation, but advanced imaging shows it physically improves the microcirculatory blood flow within the hepatic veins themselves.
Increasing the blood flow straight to the liver.
Yes. This enhanced blood flow actively delivers the high volumes of oxygen and nutrients strictly necessary to aid in the physical regeneration of damaged liver cells. It is one of the very few botanical compounds with a clinically demonstrated capacity to stimulate liver tissue regeneration.
But while I was reading through the source material on this, there is a really fascinating caveat in the research regarding how the artichoke affects human metabolism. It is a perfect illustration of how complex clinical nutrition can be and how the state of the patient dictates the efficacy of the food.
It is a critical nuance. The studies clearly demonstrated that when healthy, metabolically normal subjects consumed portions of boiled wild artichoke, they experienced a significant, measurable reduction in their postprandial glycemic and insulinemic responses, meaning their blood sugar and their insulin levels spiked far less aggressively after eating a carbohydrate-heavy meal. The artichoke blunted the spike.
That's amazing.
However, when the researchers administered that exact same artichoke protocol to patients who had already developed full-blown metabolic syndrome, this protective glycemic effect completely disappeared. It registered zero impact on their blood sugar curves.
It is wild to see that in the data. It is as if the artichoke possesses the biochemical tools to help prevent the metabolic house from catching on fire. But once the fire is fully blazing, once the severe insulin resistance of metabolic syndrome has physically set into the cells, the artichoke's specific glycemic blunting mechanism is rendered entirely ineffective. It perfectly highlights why preventative nutrition is so critical, rather than waiting for a disease state to manifest.
Indeed. But it is worth noting that even for individuals with compromised metabolic systems, the artichoke still offers massive, reliable symptom relief for gastrointestinal distress. Sonorin acts as a powerful choleretic. This means it physically stimulates the liver to dramatically increase the production and secretion of bile into the digestive tract. This surge of bile directly aids in the rapid breakdown and emulsification of dietary fats, which significantly relieves the painful symptoms of chronic indigestion, general abdominal pain, nausea, and severe bloating.
And for anyone dealing with those issues, here is a highly effective culinary tip pulled straight from the research. If you want to aggressively amplify these digestive benefits, physically combine your artichoke preparation with fresh ginger. The synergistic biochemical effect of the sonorin from the artichoke, mixing with the gingerols from the ginger root, provides incredibly rapid, soothing relief for a distressed stomach.
A great pairing.
Now let's turn our attention to the second Mediterranean staple, The absolute undisputed titan, garlic, allium sativum. We could honestly dedicate a 3-hour deep dive solely to the pharmacology of garlic, but let's carefully unpack the chemical complexity at play here.
The underlying biochemistry of a garlic clove is essentially a complex, pressurized labyrinth of volatile compounds. Much like the broccoli we discussed earlier, an intact, undisturbed garlic clove has relatively low levels of active medicine. But the moment you crush, slice, or chew that clove, you violently rupture the cellular walls and initiate a massive enzymatic cascade. An enzyme called alliinase rapidly converts the dormant align into a vast, complex cocktail of volatile organosulfur compounds. We are looking at the sudden generation of diallyl trisulfide, allicin, diallyl disulfide, diallyl sulfide, and allyl mercaptan. This specific, highly reactive cocktail of sulfur-based molecules is precisely what gives raw garlic its famously pungent, aggressive odor, and it is entirely responsible for its extraordinary medical properties.
Let's focus on the specific cancer-blocking mechanisms because the source literature gets incredibly detailed here. We're not just tossing around the vague phrase it prevents cancer. The clinical oncology data shows us exactly how it physically halts the progression of the disease. The data proves garlic actively fights and suppresses cancers of the liver, the oral cavity, the prostate, the breast, the stomach, the colon, the skin, and the pancreas. How exactly does a crushed clove of garlic manage to fight a tumor growing in the pancreas?
It executes a highly coordinated, multi-pronged biochemical assault on the specific signaling pathways that cancer cells rely on to survive. First, these organosulfur compounds actively enter the tissue and completely abrogate a process called lipid peroxidation. By stopping this runaway oxidative damage, it prevents the physical mutations to cellular DNA that initiate tumor growth.
Okay, that's step one.
Second, it aggressively inhibits nitric oxide synthase activity within the immediate tumor microenvironment. Tumors utilize specific inflammatory signaling to stimulate the growth of new blood vessels to feed themselves. The garlic compounds effectively starve the tumor of this vital inflammatory signaling.
Starving the tumor.
Third, and perhaps most critically from a pharmacological perspective, these garlic compounds physically bind to and block epidermal growth factor receptors, while simultaneously suppressing a protein complex known as nuclear factor kappa B.
Let's translate those mechanisms into a visual analogy for the listener. By actively blocking the EGF receptors on the outside of the cell, the garlic is essentially cutting the phone lines that the cancer cells use to communicate and tell each other to rapidly multiply. And by infiltrating the cell and suppressing the NF-kappa B protein complex, the garlic is physically shutting down the master genetic switch for inflammation that the tumor desperately needs to fuel its own survival.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. The garlic actively regulates the internal cell cycle and the survival signaling cascades within the tumor architecture, effectively freezing the cancer's ability to progress, adapt, and survive. It is a highly targeted anti-neoplastic action. But as aggressively powerful as garlic is against oncology targets, its clinical reputation as a profound cardiovascular cleaner is perhaps even more rigorously well documented across global literature.
The list of cardiovascular victories attributed to consistent garlic consumption is almost unbelievably long. The large-scale systematic reviews show highly significant, reliable reductions in overall systemic blood pressure. The data points to measurable reductions in waist circumference and overall body mass index. It drastically and consistently lowers circulating LDL cholesterol, non-HDL cholesterol, total overall cholesterol, and fasting triglycerides.
And those are just the standard surface-level blood panel metrics that you get at an annual physical. The deeper, highly advanced clinical imaging parameters are where garlic truly separates itself from other functional foods. Advanced cardiac CT scans show that consistent long-term garlic consumption actually improves coronary artery calcium scores.
Yeah.
This means it physically helps prevent the dangerous calcification and rigid hardening of the major arteries surrounding your heart. It massively enhances peripheral microcirculation in the extremities. It actively reduces the physical volume of both epicardial and periaortic adipose tissue, which is the highly dangerous inflammatory visceral fat that physically wraps tightly around your heart muscle and major blood vessels.
The imaging data also shows it significantly improves post-occlusive reactive hyperemia. That is a clinical measure of exactly how well and how quickly your blood vessels can physically expand and restore critical blood flow immediately after a temporary blockage. And the high-resolution vascular scans show it physically reduces the dense volume of low-attenuation plaques, while simultaneously improving carotid intima media thickness. It is literally acting as a microscopic scrubber for your entire vascular system from the inside out, actively reducing the physical structural blockages that are the direct cause of fatal heart attacks and ischemic strokes.
It is functionally unparalleled in the plant kingdom for comprehensive, multisystemic cardiovascular protection.
We have covered incredible ground, and we are now moving into our final segment. We're going to look at the unsung heroes, legumes. We are talking about the vast family of beans, lentils, chickpeas, split peas, and broad beans. These are absolute nutritional heavyweights that somehow constantly get relegated to the cheap side dish menu or skipped entirely by modern consumers because they simply don't know how to integrate them into their daily meals. To understand this global misunderstanding, we're going to look closely at a massive scoping review of food-based dietary guidelines, comparing the official government health policies across 94 different countries.
This specific scoping review offers a truly fascinating look at how bureaucratic policy directly shapes subconscious public health habits. The data pulled from the 2018 Global Dietary Database is highly revealing. Legume consumption varies wildly on a global scale, representing two entirely different nutritional realities.
Huge differences.
At the extreme low end of the spectrum, you have highly developed Western nations like Norway, reporting a median population intake of just 1.2 grams of legumes per day. To put that in perspective, that is virtually nothing. It is a statistical rounding error. At the high end of the spectrum, you have nations like Afghanistan consuming a massive average of 122.7 grams per person per day.
So, what drives that massive discrepancy? Obviously, deep cultural history, climate, and local agricultural economics play a massive role, but the researchers analyzing these 94 countries pointed out a highly fascinating psychological and policy issue at the core of the problem. Modern governments literally do not know how to accurately categorize a bean.
And that biological ambiguity is the root of the policy failure. The nutritional profile of a legume is so incredibly unique, packing high protein, complex carbohydrates, and massive fiber simultaneously, that it completely defies simple bureaucratic categorization. Look at how the global guidelines attempt to handle them. 38% of the countries simply dump legumes into the broad, protein-rich foods category, grouping them directly alongside beef, poultry, and fish. Another 15% classify them purely as starchy staples, grouping them alongside white bread, rice, and potatoes. And roughly 20% of countries give up entirely and assign legumes their own completely standalone category on the national food pyramid.
And here is the absolute kicker from the data. How a government chooses to categorize legumes directly and measurably impacts exactly how much of them the population actually eats. The data absolutely proves the psychological link. The countries that wisely choose to group legumes directly together with nuts and seeds consistently see the highest intake ranges, reaching up to that 122 grams a day mark. But get this. Some well-meaning countries tried to heavily promote legumes by placing them in two separate food groups simultaneously, hoping that the double visual exposure on the food pyramid would increase public consumption.
It makes sense on paper.
But the psychological effect completely backfired. The populations in countries that used the double category method actually ended up with significantly lower daily consumption rates.
This raises an important question regarding how our official dietary guidelines fundamentally shape our subconscious daily eating habits. When a government places a bowl of lentils directly next to a steak in the protein category, the average consumer subconsciously views them as mutually exclusive either options. They think, well, I'll just have the steak tonight instead of the lentils. I've hit my protein macro. By failing to position legumes as a highly unique, necessary daily staple with completely different benefits than meat, public health policy is inadvertently actively suppressing their consumption.
And why does this specific policy failure matter for you and your dinner plate? Because by consistently skipping the beans, you are leaving an absolute mountain of clinical health benefits on the table. Legumes offer incredibly high biological value plant protein without the saturated fat. They provide truly massive amounts of dietary fiber. That fiber not only ensures long-lasting satiety, keeping you full for hours and physically aiding in sustainable weight loss, but it actively binds to circulating cholesterol in your gut and physically pulls it out of your body, drastically lowering your LDL levels and systemic blood pressure.
Exactly.
The steady, slow-release matrix of complex carbohydrates keeps your fasting glucose completely stable, preventing insulin spikes. The systematic reviews firmly link high legume consumption to liver tissue protection and highly significant risk reductions in both colorectal and prostate cancers. And looking entirely beyond human biology, the legume plants themselves actively fix nitrogen directly back into the soil, making them absolutely essential for long-term environmental sustainability and global agricultural economic stability. They are the ultimate multifaceted win-win food.
They truly are. The
Yeah.
chronic lack of legume consumption in standard Western diets is perhaps one of the single greatest missed opportunities in modern preventative public health.
Okay, let's take a breath, because we have covered a massive amount of clinical ground today. Let's move into the grand synthesis of all this data. We started this deep dive with a clear mission to build the ultimate rigorous, science-backed shortcut to understanding the healthiest vegetables on the planet. We've traveled from the precise cellular apoptosis triggered by the myrosinase and sulforaphane in crushed broccoli, all the way to the highly bioavailable cis-lycopene unlocked by simmering tomatoes in olive oil. We deeply explored the massive athletic boosts and the very real potential carcinogenic risks of the bacterial nitric oxide pathway utilizing beetroot juice.
We covered a lot.
We marveled at the physical liver-regenerating power of ancient artichokes, the comprehensive vascular scrubbing initiated by the volatile organosulfurs in garlic, and the fascinating global policy failure surrounding the incredibly healthy, deeply misunderstood legume.
And the grand unifying takeaway from reading thousands of pages across all these rigorous systematic reviews is that no single vegetable, no matter how potent, is a magic bullet. True, resilient human health is not about finding one highly marketed superfood and eating it exclusively to the detriment of everything else. True health strictly requires a highly diverse, multicolored plate. It absolutely requires the fat-soluble carotenoids from cooked tomatoes and carrots, mixed with the water-soluble vitamins from raw broccoli, the unique prebiotics from Jerusalem artichokes, and the highly volatile organosulfurs from crushed garlic.
They all work together.
They do. These incredibly complex phytochemicals are biologically designed to interact and compound synergistically within the diverse environment of your body.
Whether you are listening to this right now, trying to prep your cardiovascular system for a marathon and looking closely at beetroot, or you are simply trying to physically protect your aging eyes from screen glare with the lutein in kale and broccoli, or you just want to drastically improve your overall gut health and digestion with the inulin in a Jerusalem artichoke. The fundamental knowledge of how to prep, cook, extract, and combine these foods is exactly as important as the foods themselves. So what does this all mean?
I think it leaves us with a highly profound, almost philosophical concept to consider as we close. We've seen how the physical act of cooking a tomato structurally alters and releases lycopene for human absorption. We've learned that completely separate anaerobic bacteria living in the crypts of our mouths are strictly biologically required to turn raw beetroot juice into a cardiovascular enhancer. We've discovered how the inulin fiber in a Jerusalem artichoke acts as a physical pH-altering key to unlock the intestinal absorption of minerals derived from completely different foods on your plate.
It's incredible synergy.
This vast, intricate web of interactions suggests something incredible. The human body didn't just evolve to extract simple, isolated calories from plants. Our biology actually outsourced highly critical physiological processes to the plants themselves and to the vast microbial colonies that constantly interact with them.
That is a staggering way to frame it. We are not closed, self-contained biological systems. We physically rely on the complex architecture of the plants and the bacteria they feed to do a massive part of our internal biochemical work for us.
Which begs a very provocative question for you to mull over the next time you eat. As our modern, highly processed diets increasingly rely on highly sterile, perfectly isolated, and synthetically manufactured supplement pills, are we unknowingly severing an ancient symbiotic biochemical dialogue that our bodies physically require to function properly? Can a perfectly sterile, isolated multivitamin ever truly replace the incredibly complex environmental communication that happens at a cellular level when you eat a whole, properly prepared plant?
That is an incredibly fascinating thought to leave on. You cannot just isolate the nutrient in a lab. You absolutely need the entire biological and microbial context to make it work. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this arms you with the hard clinical knowledge to walk into that grocery store produce aisle with a completely new, deeply empowered perspective. Until next time, keep learning and keep exploring.